In the north of Portugal is Porto, a cultural capital of Europe, Portugal's second largest city, and birthplace of the nation. The Romans founded this city on the Rio Douro and named one bank of the river Portus and the other Cale. In the centre of the city, the Praça da Liberdade. The City Hall, the Câmara Municipal, dominates the square that was constructed on sacred ground in the 18th century, as directed by Thomas de Almeida. Even today, this impressive square indicates the city's former power. On horseback, the statue of King Dom Pedro IV protectively watches over the square. Here in the upper city are the splendid buildings of businessmen and factory owners, the exterior walls of which are decorated with azulejos. Also located here, modern statues by the sculptor Enrique Moreira, and also the nude girl. The 76-metre-high Torre dos Clerigos is the symbol of the city, and was built in the middle of the 18th century on a rock at the city's most elevated point. 225 steps lead to a stunning view across the picturesque old harbour town, a carpet of red rooftops that nestle against the city's hills. The interior of the Baroque church, that was built by Niccolao Nasoni, exudes tranquility. Old religious books and scripts are displayed here, along with the tomb of the great master builder. The tower was a landmark for the harbour. A visit to the Mercado Ferreira Borges is an experience. Porto has one of the most beautiful markets in Europe. The large, cool inner courtyard is completely encircled by arcades. As in bygone times, each day the local farmers display a colourful and tasty selection of fresh fruit and vegetables. As with many of the city's buildings, this beautiful steel construction is a reminder of past times, of good fortune and financial prosperity. Porto has always been a centre of trade. Since the early Middle Ages, it was forbidden for the aristocracy to settle here. They were only allowed to stay for 3 days and were not permitted to build palaces. This law applied until the 17th century, and even the king did not possess a residence here, having only the right to stay in the bishop's palace. Close to the Lion Well is the Igreja do Carmo. This church was built between 1756 and 1768. Of particular note is the exterior wall that points towards the east and is decorated by a huge example of Azulejos art. This blue-white work of art features the placing of the crown of thorns on Jesus' head. The three-level high facade of the Carmelite church is in charming Baroque style. Also very beautiful are the numerous sarcophagus, wooden carvings and paintings that adorn the interior of the church. Even today, both the appearance and life of the city are influenced by a rich religious inheritance. A former monastery became the train station of São Bento. Indeed, they forgot the ticket counters and waiting rooms, but the huge azulejos decorated walls are still well preserved. They show fragments of Portuguese history from when this small country on the edge of Europe ruled the seas with its armada. Great battles and also great celebration. Of course, by 1912, when the station was inaugurated, these momentous events were already in the history books. The narrow and deep river valley of the Douro is spanned by 5 bridges, of which the most impressive is the Ponte Dom Louis. The Frenchman Gustave Eiffel constructed this gigantic 2-level bridge that connects Porto with its sister town, Vila Nova De Gaia. "392 meters long, 8 meters wide, it spans 442 meters. Over 3,000 tons of iron were used in its construction." On the 31st of October 1886, this bridge was inaugurated and named after the king. On the rock opposite Porto is the Serra do Pilar Monastery. It dates back to the Christian region of Portugal, the kingdom's birthplace. The interior of the monastery's church contains a richly decorated altar and several extraordinary statues of saints that indicate the deep piety of the people. The adjoining vestry also features ecclesiastical treasures, such as monstrances, paintings and furniture. From here there is the most beautiful view. over the old town of Porto that clings to the granite rock, the gigantic bridge, and the river valley deep below. Vila Nova De Gaia is the name of the sister town that is situated opposite Porto. Today, it's almost a city district in itself, and is also where many famous port wine cellars can be found. In full sail, it looks as though the ships are waiting to transport their cargoes of world-famous port wine. Ribeira, the area on the opposite side, is Porto's oldest and most traditional district. Its picturesque houses surrounding the busy tourist harbour. The district was established during the 18th century. The city wall along the river was demolished. An excellent way to see the sights is a boat trip on the Rio Douro, the second largest river in Portugal, upstream past the old harbour. Over the centuries, the river has carved itself deep into the countryside, to its mouth on the Atlantic Ocean. It is an interesting design of nature. Five bridges connect each riverbank. Two of them are monuments that date back to the Industrial Revolution of the 19th century. Superbly formed iron framework constructions. A new bridge was built next to the old railway bridge. And now the boat turns and travels back to the city. Further downstream, the sights become a little obscure as both bridge and river vanish behind a dense curtain of mist. Portugal's famous navy set out from Porto's harbour to establish the country's first colonies in North Africa. The ebb and flow of the river still influences the life of the city on the banks of the Rio Douro. The river has always been the city's lifeline, a trading route to the whole world. The entire river valley was designated as a vine-growing area because here is where the world-famous port wine is exclusively grown. Franciscan monks settled here in the 13th century against the will of the mighty bishop Pedro Salvador and founded this monastery that was completed in 1425. During the siege of Porto by Napoleon's armies, the monastery was set on fire and subsequently became a military headquarters. There are only a few remains of the original religious building. Fortunately, stone statues and gates survived the fire. The left side of the facade had to make space for the palace. In the monastery's adjoining museum, there's a collection of valuable objects and clerical furnishings. The abundance of Baroque carvings and gold decorations with which the church was equipped during the 17th and 18th century is breathtaking. There are also various images of saints and paintings of early religious art. This church is also known as the Golden Church. Baroque splendour within the golden building is truly remarkable. The prosperity of the city is based on its diverse economy: steel and petrochemical industries, textile manufacture, port wine, and its fish canneries. In front of the monastery is the starting point for the Carro Elettrico. Dating back to 1940, this tram line still travels alongside the river. Past the old quarter of Vila Gaia, whose tiny houses are a picturesque sight. The washing is hung up to dry on small balconies. In an old building on the outskirts of Porto, there's a museum that contains a collection of restored trams. Various types of trams are exhibited here, fully restored for posterity. Valuable and well-restored exhibits make it possible to study the development of the city's public transport system. The tram returns straight ahead on its 1-kilometre journey. High above the Douro Valley are the gardens of the Crystal Palace. All around this sports palace, and caught in the mists of the River Douro, there are fountains and flower beds. Old avenues lead to small ponds and provide cool shade from the heat of the day. Stone images and fascinating walls adorn the lovingly laid out rose garden that contains many different varieties of the Queen of Flowers. park's wildlife also seems to be at home here. The stone figures that adorn the wells are reminiscent of the classical parks of the Italian Renaissance, in which an assortment of gargoyles were included for the amusement of visitors. From here, there's an enchanting view across the deep carved valley of the Rio Douro, the main artery of this region. The cathedral dominates the city like a medieval fortress, guarded by Henry the Seafarer. The people worked hard and jealously guarded their rights. In 1394, Henry the Seafarer was born here. His parents were King Charles and the Englishwoman Philippa of Lancaster. The ancient fortified church, on the highest point, towers above on the old town's granite rock. Due to much restoration work, the facade of the massive fortress is still an impressive sight. The walls of the open passages above the cloister are decorated with azulejos that date back to the 18th century. The Gothic cloister is a typical Portuguese building. Elegant yet strong arcades supported on pillars that contain a perforated frieze. The walls of the lower arcades were built by Antonio Rijarte, and the newly restored cloister are also adorned with azulejos. These works of art feature various images that depict the daily life of the city and highlights of its religious history. The treasures of religious art, exhibited in the vestry, contain some unique examples. In the cathedral, Portugal's maritime relationship with England was established by this marriage. It marked the first alliance between both countries. This Roman longhouse is dark and gloomy, unlike the Baroque sacrament altar. The huge room has a foundation that is in the shape of a cross, and Gothic arcades are crowned by a granite dome. This city has survived the march of time, with all of its picturesque districts, including its Baroque splendor, the palatial houses of its elite, and its bridges from the Industrial Revolution. Porto, birthplace of Portugal in the north of the country, a cultural capital of Europe, whose spirit still lives on through the centuries.